Greetings and welcome to the International Pediatric Simulation Society podcast. This show is for people passionate about pediatric simulation-based education, training, and research. Podcast hosts are members of IPSS, a global community of multidisciplinary healthcare professionals from over 30 countries, all dedicated to improving the care of infants and children worldwide. Each week, one of our sub-hosts, Christine Bailey, Elaine Ng, Aaron Karn-Bennett, and myself, Samreen Vora, will introduce you to a new guest and bring you into a conversation with simulationists and healthcare professionals from across the world. Come along. Dr. Samreen Vora here, and this episode is for those of you who are feeling nostalgic from Rome or who weren't able to make it to IPSSW 2026 in Rome. It was recorded live with our keynote speaker, Dr. Mariantina Gotzis. She is a professor of practice in the Interactive Media and Games Division at the School of Cinematic Arts at the University of Southern California. As founding director of the Creative Media and Behavioral Health Center, she oversees design and evaluation of educational and therapeutic interventions using interactive media. She has led competitively funded programs with public and private funding and collaborated internationally with multiple universities across the world. She is currently a visiting professor at the Aristotle University School of Medicine in Greece. With 40-plus publications in peer-reviewed journals and conferences, she is an associate editor at Frontiers of Virtual Reality in Medicine. She developed and directs the graduate programs MA in Cinematic Arts and MFA in Interactive Media. She holds a BFA in Photography, Film, Electronic Media, and an MFA in Electronic Visualization with a specialization in Virtual Reality from the University of Illinois, Chicago. Let's jump into our conversation live from Rome. Welcome to our podcast. I'm really excited to have you as our guest today. I'll note for our audience that we are live at IPSS for this episode, and you just this morning gave our keynote talk. And I was privileged enough to be in the audience to hear that talk and to also hear just the reaction of those that are here at IPSSW in Rome to your talk. They were really excited to just hear you're of the norms of the field that I think a lot of people in the audience are. And it was really awesome to be able to expand our frames and the ways we think about things. So, hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's my great privilege and honor to be here and to give the talk this morning, which was really design research and health humanities focused. I work primarily in healthcare, not as a healthcare professional, but primarily with healthcare professionals, which is very exciting for me. So it was really nice to give this talk and have the opportunity to connect with people.
I love that. I'm curious, how did you get invited? I'd love to hear the backstory on how you came to be here.
I don't think it's a very exciting backstory, except that Dr. Todd Chang and I have been colleagues for quite some time. I think today we remembered that we met in 2013, perhaps, at a workshop at Children's Hospital. I don't remember the context of the event. There's so many of these great events that we get to meet people. And we've done team building, think tank type of project together for games and simulation. This has been his thing. He's always been interested in it. So we work in an adjacent kind of field, adjacent institutionally also, and I think have admired each other from afar and up close for a while.
And here you are. And I think Dr. Chang is here as well. So that was great to see those connections. So perhaps we start by, if you could share, what was the title of your talk?
The title of my talk was Applied Media Arts and Game Design, Methodological Approaches in Educational and Healthcare Contexts.
That's a mouthful, but tells us a lot about what you talked about. One of the things that someone in the audience actually named, there's this thread you could follow that connected it all back to our humanism. And that was critical, that connection for an audience that does pediatric simulation around the world. Throughout your talk, you actually shared very specific examples. You have such a depth and breadth of experience. Was that an intended thread?
I think it's I've been doing this for about 20 years, and my motivation for being in healthcare is it's a combination of like self-serving, but also other person serving. So I've been a person dealing with chronic illness from I would say since conception, but let's just say, since I was a child. And then my family has had a lot of interesting health challenges over the years. But it wasn't until I lost a very close friend and had to interact with the healthcare system as a caregiver for someone else while I was a student and not a healthcare student that I understood a lot of challenges and gaps. And then I did a lot of volunteering for 2 or 3 years in a patient-based organization, patient-run organization in advocacy and education. And then I thought that really all the skills that I have in art and technology and engineering, I wanted to put toward applied healthcare solutions, both for education and therapy. So I've dedicated, my entire middle career, I would say, to this. And that human aspect is really primary for me. It's very front and center at all times for my friends, for the people I love, and then every person that I meet, especially a lot of the patient-centered work that we do, where people come in and generously give advice and subject matter expertise to us, and they become a point of reference to us for the entire duration of the project. So it's impossible to walk away from them.
That's interesting to hear you say, like, it's an inevitable thread. And there was something you said that was related to this humanism. In your talk, you said about healthcare workers. It's not hard to find that humanism in them, but sometimes we may not remember it ourselves as a physician by background when there's all this around us and all the things we're trying to do and are asked to do by our organizations. We might ourselves forget it, but it's still there. And to have someone like you be able to see that and to say, hey, there's a way to tap into that, access that. And the work you do, you are accessing that. I feel like you just described when someone comes to you and you're working with them, you form that relationship to understand, okay, what is the design need? So I heard you talk a lot about in your talk about that design need and how you get to that. Before I get to that question, though, I just realized, because for some of our listeners, they haven't heard you talk. So let's maybe get into at least a little bit of detail so they have some context about some of what you shared in your talk, some of the examples and what you've worked on and what you've created.
Sure. I gave a lot of case study examples. So, for example, I gave examples from our educational work with gardening and cooking game for third, fourth, and fifth graders that was using pre-AI technology, pedagogical agent. I gave an example of a Connect-based game for ADHD for I would say, 7 to 12 in terms of age. Then I talked about one of our most successful interventions because we do a lot of technology. And again, I'm a technologist, but I did start out as a person in painting and drawing. So I have a love for all things analog for sure. And I'm pretty practical. And so I believe that powerful public health solutions have to scale. And so our most successful intervention is a game called the Brain Architecture Game, which is a resilience simulator, essentially. You build a metaphor, really, of a brain with pipe cleaners and straws from birth to age 8. And it simulates the first 5 years of life where you have accelerated neuroplasticity. And then you play through life experience cards and you get materials based on the kinds of life experiences you have, positive, toxic, or tolerable. And at some point, you get weights that get hung from the tallest part of your structure, which sometimes might collapse under life stresses. And this is a game that translates really a consensus on the science of early childhood and how it affects lifelong health. And so it's really a foundational intervention for having any conversations that are care centered, and especially in pediatrics. But this is used for adult contexts very often, and most often, I would say, because as I tell people, when you become an adult, your child brain comes with you. You don't swap brains.
It's fun, right? Yeah.
So that continuum, understanding humans as a continuum from birth to end of life, lifespan science is really core for the methodology we use at our lab. We're not disease focused or age focused. So this is something that has really helped ground everything kind of around it. And as an intervention itself, also from its conception to the collaboration that helped made it successful, it has been a model for designing a lot of other things, and has also a really big part of humanism and humanity built into it.
I tell people often, you bring your whole selves. You're not leaving a part of yourself out the door. You bring your whole self into a space. And it sounds like you take all of that into consideration. That particular game really struck me because we teach, and you focused on the ACEs, right? I think a lot of
Yes.
folks in pediatrics would be familiar with some of the traumas people face and the
Mhm.
impact, depending on everyone's life experiences. For some people, that's a very easy concept. And for others, very difficult to really understand. And
Yeah.
you make it, I'm a visual learner. And so that game to me was like mind blowing to be like, that's it. Like to be able to show people with very simple tools, this is what it looks like inside a brain at
Yeah.
those ages. Uh, that's just so powerful to be able to do that.
I think this is where simulation is powerful, to make those invisible things visible. And that was how I opened my talk, that we are visual creatures, and that visual system occupies so much. But it is tied to kind of a whole multisensory design challenge in general, because you do need the rest of it.
Yeah.
And the whole sort of neuroaesthetics of simulation, I think, to me is very interesting. And that there's that emotional dimension also of how the other person is feeling, and also how you're feeling in relationship to the other person. Because as I like to tell people, there's you, the other person, and the relationship is a third person in the room.
Yeah.
And in
Yes.
design, we're always kind of trying to understand how to create a container that makes more desirable things to emerge and to suppress the less desirable things. That's a very esoteric thing to say in design, but simulation, though, has all those challenges. You're trying to create an experience that will, teach people technical things, that will familiarize them with a lot of other things. And what do you put into it is really kind of mysterious. It's not just about press this thing here, whether it's on the patient or in a button. There's a lot more that you have to press metaphorically within quotations that you don't actually even know you're doing.
Yes, I love that you did start your talk with this, make the things that are invisible visible. And as you went through, I think you had shared after this brain game a few other things. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about kind of where you took that.
Sure. I also talked about one of our newer card games that we are working on called Broadening Circles, which is for really fostering conversations about patient centered research. And there in this game, you have teams that are patient center, researcher center, perhaps people in the middle, administrators and staff. They're all working toward creating impact using resources they have to leverage environmental values and mitigate challenges in real time. So this simulates real environments that are clinical and research kind of oriented. You may not reach all your goals at the end of all your periods, but you basically have to communicate and make decisions and pool resources and think about competing agendas. And it's a game that's played by teams of people who don't have experience with research, and trying to familiarize them with the experience of that, which, my God, is the most invisible thing of them all. Um, to help teams that are existing and functional to perhaps have more challenging conversations about how they do things and problem solve, or perhaps even debrief. And then also for teams of researchers and healthcare workers who want to engage with patient advocacy groups. Perhaps they have community advisory boards or patient advisory boards. So we are planning a release soon for an alpha. It's a game we worked on for a little while now. It's ready to be shared with people for feedback. So we've done a lot of internal testing. We've engaged with a lot of our stakeholders and our relationships, but now we're going to put it outside of the walls of our institution.
A lot of these things resonate, I imagine, with a lot of our simulationists who are listening. Some of the things you were trying to accomplish make me think about interprofessional spaces. Sometimes there's this divide between the healthcare professionals and the families. And so this game with the focus on patient-centered care, even you mentioning connecting with community advisory boards, like the goal of this game to create across this unseen divide that sometimes we pretend isn't there, but often is. And you started at the beginning of this conversation with a piece of that because you shared a piece of yourself being on the patient side when you lost a friend or your own experiences and thinking about how do we cross and really connect people to move things forward. And this game sounds like it is a way to do that, which is pretty incredible.
The game aggregates experience that I've had for a very long time, that professional in the personal. And I designed the first version of it with one of my longtime collaborators, Dr. Jordan Marsh, who is a nurse psychologist. And her background is in both clinical work and research, very technology oriented, very lifespan focused oriented. And we worked together for so long on so many projects. And also, as a person who's cared for her family for a long time, we had these joint experiences. And so it pools, I'm not going to say the number, how many years, I'm not going to out us how old we are exactly, right? But very long experience, long kind of many, many years of experience of these challenges into one place. And when we played it with the first group outside of our group who was doing both clinical and patient-centered work, they were shocked that you could put all this stuff into a game. Interesting. Because I think it's surprising how many unusual things can go into it. But games have evolved so much as a medium that you can really tell so many different types of stories with it. And I have to say that I'm also a bit of a nerd, so this wasn't just experience-based. I did a lot of research on the literature of patient-centered practices and best practices and vocabulary. So it pooled the things that you know with the things that other people know, which is important in design. You need both. You need the scholarly work. You need people's actual practice-based experiences to combine.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah, you have to make sure you're using the right language that's established or shared language, and also then having different perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. That's really cool. Um, some questions you asked during your presentation, or actually proposed that should be asked. I'm wondering if you share a little bit more about that.
Sure. Some of the questions that I've learned to think about throughout the years, because of the collaborators that I've had, and also my experiences, who decides what gets, let's say, simulated in your context? Who decides what's normal and what kinds of things are represented and how do you tend to those things? I think that very often we look at the science, but science is a very broad word. Science only contains what we study. And so a lot of times maybe what we study is very focused on the biology and the physiology, those kinds of things. But there could be other things like the disparities or things that have to do with a system. And some of those things are difficult to think about simulating, but the world of simulation has also changed very much. I shared with one of the co-organizers yesterday that my first experience at a VR conference was a haptic epidural insertion. And that was like 25, 30 years ago almost. And I found that super exciting, but it was also very disconnected from the context of whose body is this and what is happening. But everything was very technology focused early on. It felt very magical that you could have something actually simulate this. And there was no sound or feedback or anything like that. It was just a device. But when you really step back from it to think about what does this epidural insertion really mean, it changes the way with which you hold space between you and the person that you're actually doing a procedure with. So when you're simulating, getting into that space mentally and emotionally is actually important. I think we have the illusion that you have to be disconnected in order to do a procedure. But I've found over the years, the best experiences I've had with healthcare workers were the ones that could do the technical and the emotional with the same competence, right? That's the ultimate
at the same
thing.
time.
And at the same time, right? That's the miracle. That's the true miracle. Because yes, you want clinical skill at a minimum, obviously, But if you have the emotional at the same time, that's kind of miraculous.
I love that you describe that as a miracle. And as a physician, just training, I've been doing a lot of expanding in medical education, training medical students, and your description about, gosh, this has to happen at the same time. I think about how we've taken training and parsed it all out. And part of it is cognitive load. And
Mhm.
but what we prioritize is, well, let's teach the technical skills. And then sometimes we teach the
Yeah,
emotional
yeah.
skills, not always. And I think there's more of a push to teach those skills. And then are we teaching the combination of the two? Because if you think about cognitive load and
Mm.
the need to scaffold those to be able to do them together. And even you describing that, that's the miracle and that's the magic. And how can we get folks to that space?
But it is also where the science takes us
Yeah.
because we know there's one brain and you cannot
Separate it. Yeah.
separate cognitive from the emotional. And in fact, executive function means both. It means that you have working memory, attention, cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, all working together in harmony. So how can you train separately? You really can't because
Mhm.
neurons that fire together wire together,
Yeah.
right? So isn't that
Yeah.
it's the thing that people say. And I think that in the training, there is anxiety over the technical skills. And I call them truly technical skills because I think the science is when you do all of it together and when the magic really happens, which means you have to be thinking about it ahead of time. And one thing that I have to say is that the focus on the technical only actually contributes to the burnout of the health professionals because when you're teaching people to be disconnected from themselves and the humanity of the person across from them, over time, that really wears on people. There's
Yeah.
no way we can't operate at that level of cognitive dissonance for a very long time. So I feel that the people who are extremely present and attentive in absolute chaos when the person across from them is hurting and where they're hurting themselves, they have the highest skill. And that's the ideal that we should strive for. And we certainly don't manage to do that at all times. But that is what we should be trying to train for because the bare minimum is not cutting it even for the person who is doing the task. It's
Yeah.
not good for the longevity of their career.
It's for both. It's not even sometimes the goal, it's for the patient, but it's for both. It's for
Mhm.
everybody in that space. And I want to just emphasize what you said in there. I call them all technical because even in your talk, you mentioned not loving that we're calling these skills soft skills or non technical skills because they're some of the hardest skills to master or to learn and then to do it together.
Mhm.
Uh, it also tied for me to another example you gave in your talk. The other example you gave was the physical therapy and designing. So I'll have you share the example, but the piece that I really think connects here is you specifically talked about it wasn't just about what I will call the technical, but all of it, right? Someone doing a movement with integrity, like they don't want to look like a fool or, so all of the pieces mattered. And I think you spoke much better to us. I'm gonna let you kind of share what that example was. And yeah.
Yeah, we've done a lot of cognitive motor rehabilitation for a long time, and we've learned that the what we need to know in order to design games and VR experiences for patients and for physical therapists to use with their patients is never published in the academic literature. So we sit and observe people and ask them a lot of questions in real time because the health professionals have tacit knowledge in terms of what they're looking at. When they're someone with Parkinson's is in their clinic and they're doing a quick assessment and then a gait rehab session, the things they're looking for and they're customizing in real time for that patient is completely invisible. They've learned that through years of training, of seeing people, of working with their teachers, and they don't know what they know. And they know so much. And we don't know why they're making decisions about certain things. And so unlike unlike when you're teaching surgery, where you have to be more think aloud or talk aloud while you're teaching, a lot of other professions don't necessarily have that. They learn and then they work with their patients and they don't even tell the patients what they're doing. I find that because I've done a lot of physical therapy, when I have physical therapists or OTs that are actually telling me in real time what they're doing with me and what they're looking at, I feel first of all, engaged. I'm learning. I know what's happening. I don't feel like an object that's just being touched and manipulated. I feel that we're in conversation. And that's the kind of thing we want to, elicit when we're observing, because we're going to take all that data, and it's very precious data about all the qualities of the interaction. So this entire interaction, the movement, the quality of the movements, and obviously in physical therapy, what kinds of things are okay to do and not okay. What is actually good enough? I talked a lot about this concept of good enough and benchmarking for everything that we design, that we want people to do. Right? When you're asking people to do something, their anxiety is, well, what is perfect and what is good enough? And when does it need to be perfect? And when is good enough really truly good enough? And those are the kinds of things that you learn from observation and questioning, because we don't publish these things. These are deeply human kinds of things. But once you observe a lot of them, you can actually set up a benchmark of what is good enough. And then when designers are trying to create something, you can say, you know what, fidelity in this context means this, and all this other stuff you have to ignore. In VR especially, this is important because people are obsessed with realism, and realism is overrated. It's that unfortunate second word in virtual reality. Realism really is about what is necessary. And so a lot of things are unnecessary, and some things are extremely necessary to render in the simulation scenario. And that's what you're trying to get at. And fidelity is not making everything exactly the same way you saw it before. It may not be relevant to do it the same way or for it to look the same way. So you have to just extract those essential things that matter, that will transfer from one context to another with the right fidelity. That really is extremely important.
You touched on this word fidelity in simulation. As simulation developed and we had all this new technology, that I feel like that term was somewhat hijacked. I'm talking about high fidelity, meaning a mannequin that can do all these things, where fidelity, I love that you boiled it down to it's about what's necessary. And so that's really beautiful. I want to go back to what you just spoke about, the good enough benchmarking and the perfect. And I think there's a few times you mentioned not to punish. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that too.
So when we're eliciting a sort of movement or performance, right? So you can imagine in the cognitive motor rehab, so from our ADHD student game early on to shoulder exercise that we did for individuals with spinal cord injuries, for manual wheelchair users, essentially, persons with Parkinson's, and now with burn survivors, primarily for hand and upper arm injuries. You don't want to punish doing the wrong thing, because it's not very helpful in these types of scenarios. I mean, it's never helpful, to be honest. I'm an abolitionist, so any carceral education, carceral justice, carceral design is just not a good thing. Consequences is different than punishment. And that's a very kind of fine line. So you don't want to tell people they did the wrong thing. You want to incentivize the right thing and reward them with a bigger challenge. That's learning. If you're performing something at mastery, you're performing and you're done with that, you can reward people with raising the bar. And that's extremely important. That's also a principle in physical therapy and motor learning. If you're in learning, you have to get there, but you need to raise the bar at an adequate pace for the person. And there needs to be some room in there. And especially in a scenario where you have hierarchies. So I talked a bit about this. I find that in medical contexts, and especially in settings that are international, I find that my health professional colleagues have a lot of trouble looking incompetent in front of their students or colleagues. They're very stressed about that. And in professional settings, you don't want to appear less than competent. In my environment that is very playful, you can imagine a game design program. Students are generally, especially art students, they're not afraid to be silly and stupid, because they understand the difference between what we're doing in a real world scenario. There's again, playfulness. And playfulness is how we learn. All mammals learn through play. And we've beaten that out of people in healthcare, because it is an environment where the stakes are high and health and safety are paramount. but playfulness goes a long way. And in pediatrics, you can't forget that about yourself because you're going to be working with children. And even in their, sort of darkest hour, right? You can distract them with relevant humor and playfulness, if not necessarily a joke, but playfulness goes a long way to soothe people. So in education of adults, playfulness goes a long way to soothe people.
Yeah. Just that concept, so brilliant and ties to so many pieces that we do in simulation. I think a lot about that. When I started sim, and I share this often when I was in training and we would do simulations in training, there was one, the fear of looking stupid in front of my colleagues, and two, this idea of if you didn't get the right answer in the sim, there was not necessarily a punishment, but it felt like it because you didn't get the right answer and you failed. Don't punish for the wrong, but rather build them up. And I think there was a lot at this conference. Also, I intersected with positive psychology. There's a lot of conversations about that. And I think that's partly what you're describing that's underlying that. So you mentioned these hierarchies and working internationally. And that is one of the most challenging spaces to work. And you also hit on, we're all pediatric simulation society, and that playfulness. And I think we lose that in the seriousness of our training. And I think for me, that was the core of your talk of just the humanism and how we truly as humans learn, and to be able to go back to that as we are creating whatever we're doing in our spaces. Are there other things that we've missed talking about that were really essential for your talk that you want to bring up?
I talk a bit about our project in palliative care, and it's an interesting project relating to simulation. It's an interesting design challenge because grief is a design challenge that is often overlooked. What we call thanatosensitive work in design is kind of a third space. However, in the last decade, I find more and more people are interested in it. It doesn't seem as taboo to try to deal with it. I think as our students have more mental health awareness and literacy and vocabulary, they're more willing to tackle difficult things. So we work with patients who are at our county hospital, primarily cancer patients that have less than 1 year. To live, a gynecologic cancer patient, with my colleague Dr. Mona Guo, and she came to me with an ask that really touched me because I told her I'd waited for her for a very long time, which was she would record something for people to leave behind to their loved ones, because a lot of the patients at county, they're not very literate technologically or with language. They don't have a lot of resources. Whereas big palliative care programs might have services that help people. We adapted the Stanford Letter Project and the Dignity Therapy Protocol to interview our patients, and from that create a data set that could be used for the students in my lab to create legacy gifts to give to their loved ones. And so how do you simulate like the essence of someone's life through an interactive experience? So we've made augmented reality cards and VR video, and we have now augmented reality lanterns, and there's just so many different things that the students have really innovated on in terms of a design that can capture the essence of a person's hopes and memories and dreams. This is not a simple thing, but one of our patients came to LA to be a writer, and she had 3 kids. And I should say she has 3 kids because even though I'm pretty sure she moved to hospice, if I have not witnessed our patients passing, they're still in the very much in the present. And we wrote our placards in their exhibition in the present also. So she had all these stories about her kids that she was sharing, and the students made an illustrated book out of her stories that with augmented reality, some of the vignettes come to life.
Wow.
So, and they gave her 2 different versions of storyboards. So she selected. So it's a co-production with the patients. And it really has to be because they're so tired and they have such emotional load, and not all of them can even get through this or want to do this because they're dealing so much emotionally. But those who are willing to engage, they're very generous with their time. And I find that those students have so much anxiety to capture and create something that has so much of them into like a single thing. And for me, the exercise is You don't need everything. You just need something that captures the gestalt of a patient that they can give to their families that matters, just enough of them that matters so that they're connected with them. And same thing for the letters that our writers co-write with them, and also with the translators. It's, again, a very big co-production. And I think it has this same design challenge where you are trying to curate the essence of the experience. It can't be everything, only what is important. That fidelity of a person's being is a very crazy design challenge. So it's taught us quite a bit about what matters to a person's life. And this is where the talent comes in terms of clinical skills. When you come into a room and can so quickly assess a person's being and what matters to them. And we talk about joint decision making. There's a lot of theoretical stuff that we talk about, right, in healthcare. But in practice, how quickly can you make that happen? I think is a real skill that can be trained, because it's luxurious to have a long interview with people. If you work in a mental health setting, you have more time, but in an emergency room, 5 minutes that you have, which the person is having like perhaps the worst day of their lives,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Those things matter. And I've lived in emergency rooms, and my experience of people, whatever the position they work in an emergency room, when that skill, when they have it, is so evident to me. Because now that I'm so much older and I also have so much experience surviving as a patient, I appreciate that talent and I recognize it so quickly. And I let people know, because it's extraordinary when you witness it, because those 5 minutes, you will remember those 5 minutes for a very long time. So if 5 minutes is all you have, your interaction with a person is essential. Both the skill by which you do something, but really it's also that emotional thing.
Yeah.
That will stay with a person. They'll forgive you screwing up the insertion of the butterfly, whatever, but they won't forgive an emotional interaction that is poor.
I love that as educators, because I always wonder, right, those emotional skills, those connection skills, they're hard to teach if teachable. And I'm really glad that you said you can train folks to that, because that's important. It's really important. And going back to something you said earlier, we're bringing our whole selves, right? So when you're saying, hey, this co-creation, when you described your student, what they think matters, right? And they're like, well, I need to capture this entire person's life and all the things, and what the person thinks that matters, and trying to come to a shared space where they can then co-create something based on what matters to that patient. That's a really difficult thing, and an incredible description, I would say, of what we do in healthcare, as the healthcare professional coming in and then that patient coming in and figuring out. And I think we forget that.
Yeah, and I would say that, time is the ultimate adversary in healthcare.
Yes.
And, we're better to learn that than a palliative care project. Quite literally, we are racing against time that they have, the time that we're stealing away from their clinical appointments, the time that they want to spend with their family, or to just like be alone and consolidate thoughts in their head and feelings. But I think that when you get really good at what you do, you can get a lot done in a very short amount of time, because you only do what matters. And, the right thing at the right time, at the right place. And it's hard to get to that. It's hard.
Well, it's hard to get to that. I mean, when you said that, like, Tim, I'm getting chills, because you think about who decides what matters. And me as a physician going in, I think I've mastered that skill. I'm getting to write what matters. I only need to know what your allergies are. I need to look at your baby, and then I need to go and order the treatment they need. And you, as the patient, that is not all the things that matter in that room. And so hence, you, as you said, you can train it. And that skill of being able to go into a space and only get at what matters, hopefully can be trained, but takes time. And as you said, over your years of experience, now you can recognize that. And I think it takes time, and even being able to get to an awareness that I need to learn that skill. Like, just because I've mastered whatever, putting a central line in, or whatever the skill is, doesn't mean I've gotten to that where I know what matters in this room and can get to it quickly. That's incredible. So, thank you very much for joining us. I had just so many expansions of my frames and my thoughts just in this conversation. The way you're able to just describe these things that are in this parallel space that applies so much to everything, even for me, my own hats, right, as a physician, the emergency room. And also there's a space in there where you describe things specifically about rewarding with bigger challenges and not punishing mistakes. I was thinking about my other hat. I have 4 kids, right? So all of that applied in all of those spaces, and I imagine applies for a lot of our listeners as well. So thank you very much for joining us today on this podcast, and hopefully we get to keep you in our sim spaces and keep intersecting with you going forward.
I would love to. Thank you so much. This has been a really great experience, and I'm very honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the IPSS Podcast. A special thanks to our behind-the-scenes producer, the talented Danish Kumar, and to the Starship Foundation for providing the equipment that makes this podcast possible. Join us next time.